Hello lovelies, and welcome back to Seriously Now. I'm Lex Carline, and I hope you're having a wonderful week so far. Now last week I did promise that this week would be something a bit more light and fluffy after Lucy Letby. Not sure it's really fluffy, but it's definitely a lot lighter. Not hard really, is it? I'd actually like to thank you guys because Lucy Letby was a bit of a divisive topic, wasn't it? There are many of you who are on the side of the fence that she is, yes, absolutely guilty, that it's just too much of a coincidence, and that she is where she should be. But then there are quite a few of you who think that Lucy Letby has been set up, and that the raw sewage coming through the sinks and things was real, and stood to lose the hospital a hell of a lot of money, so it was easier to blame it on Lucy. Interesting. I think her appeal is going to be a very interesting one, and as soon as we have any more information, I will of course keep you updated. So then, today we are going to go back to the early 1900s, and it involves a large ship and an iceberg. Is that too obvious? Yes, I am talking about the Titanic, but I'm not going to bore you with the traditional story, the one we all know, the iceberg tragic accident. But was it really? Now, curiously, the sinking of the Titanic actually has quite a few conspiracy theories surrounding it. So today we're going to have some fun and look at some of them. So, in no particular order, our first one is the mummy's curse. A passenger named William Stead, who sadly went down with the ship, had spoken about a cursed mummy that had supposedly been causing havoc all around London for some time. He thought it was a myth, possibly based on colonialists' guilt or anxiety about the land that they had plundered. Plundered is such a good word. So we're talking Native American burial grounds and Egyptian curses, just to name a few. One of the passengers he told his theory to then went on to tell the Washington Post, and they decided to run a story about it. So nothing's changed with regards to media hysteria then. Now, for those of you that have seen the film, there was a character called Maggie Brown, played by Kathy Bates, who is phenomenal. And it turned out that Margaret Brown was real. And she had actually taken Egyptian artefacts on board that included Ushabti figurines. And these were to go to a museum in Denver. Now, Maggie herself spoke many languages fluently, which is something I'm highly jealous of. Trying to learn Spanish at the moment. Thank you, Duolingo. Not going very well, though. Don't think my brain is that way inclined, but hey-ho. Maggie actually used her language skills to help commission a lifeboat, and so she helped many people. What an absolute legend. So there were claims that a mummy was on board the Titanic when it sank, and this was from the British Museum. Supposedly it had been sold to an American who was just shipping it home. But the mummy in question wasn't actually a real mummy. It's been known as the unlucky mummy, and it was actually a wooden mummy board. Now, this was a type of cover that was placed on the mummy's coffin. And in this case, the actual mummy it belonged to is thought to have been Amun-Ra, and he's never left Egypt. And as it was an interior board, there were no identity markers, as there would have been if it had been an exterior board. The mummy board was said to be brought to England by one of 4 young travellers, who sadly all died in close proximity to moving the board. So those Egyptian curses are real then. It passed to one of the sisters of the travellers, and death and destruction was said to soon follow. The clairvoyant Madame Helena Blavatsky was said to have identified... Why can't I talk today? The clairvoyant Madame Helena Blavatsky was actually said to identify an evil influence and traced it to the board, and she advised them to get rid of the board ASAP. This is when it was given to the British Museum. Now, the kicker with this one is that the mummy board actually never left the British Museum, and as far as I could find, is still actually there today. So that takes us nicely out of Theory 1 and on to Theory 2, which is the U-boat theory. Now, if you didn't know, a U-boat is a naval submarine generally used by Germany, particularly in World War I and World War II. And although the Titanic was one of the biggest maritime disasters of all time, and it actually predated the start of World War I by 2 years, there are those who fully believe this theory. So if this were the case, it would mean that it was a precursor to the Lusitania in 1915, where a German U-boat actually did torpedo a British ocean liner, the British ocean liner, off the Irish coast, and sadly killed more than 1,200 people. I mean, there's nothing to say that the U-boat wasn't there and being trialled or something like that in 1912. Some of the survivors of the Titanic actually reported seeing an unidentified vessel, claiming it was about 5 or 6 miles away and it lingered until about 2 a.m. Now, my question is, how do you gauge that at sea, especially in the dark? And Dr. Franklin Rule speculated to the Huffington Post that the submarine actually surfaced to assess the damage it had caused before skulking off, and he also cited survivor accounts of explosions seemingly going off deep within the ship, said it might have been a deliberate attack or simply an accident. So I'd say that one's pretty plausible. Coming in at number 3 today is that a man named J.P. Morgan was responsible for the sinking of the Titanic. Now, Morgan was an American philanthropist, and his company, the International Mercantile Marine Company, acquired the White Star Line Company, and along with Harland and Wolff built the Titanic, and 2 other liners, the Olympic and the Britannic. This was all funded by Morgan. The theory in this case is that he arranged the sinking of the Titanic to pave the way for establishing the Federal Reserve Bank in the United States. So he, along with Bruce Ismay, who was the chairman and managing director of the White Star Line, plotted to sink the ship to rid themselves of key opposition to the bank. Bit far-fetched, but... Now, they said they did this by Ismay convincing the ship's captain Edward Smith to head full speed into a known iceberg field with less than half the required lifeboats and no red signal flares. Surely that would go against everything being a captain means. Now, the opposition that J.P. Morgan was so desperate to get rid of was John Jacob Astor, who was a millionaire, Benjamin Guggenheim, who was a mining magnate, and Isidor Straus, who was the co-owner of Macy's department store. I'm sure most of us have heard of Macy's. And all 3 of these men did actually go down with the ship, as did Captain Smith. The last sighting of Astor was that he was clinging to the side of a lifeboat. Guggenheim, unfortunately, like so many others, was never recovered, but he was said to have a rose through his suit jacket's buttonhole and claimed, "We've dressed up in our best and are prepared to go down like men," which is pretty sad, really, isn't it? And finally, Isidor Straus and his wife Ida. Now, she refused to leave her husband, and for those of you who have seen the film, with the old couple lying on the bed as the water is rushing in towards the end, that was actually said to be a nod to the Strauses. Isidor's body was recovered a couple of weeks after the sinking, but sadly Ida's was never found. In true captain style, Captain Edward Smith is known to have gone down with the ship. They do say that a captain never leaves his ship. I don't think that's always the case, but in terms of honour and all that, it's yeah, don't know where I'm going with that. But anyway, theories vary as to whether Captain Smith was actually inside the vessel, shot himself before it sank, or whether he managed to get a child to the safety of a lifeboat before disappearing beneath the waves. And of all the ways to go, I think that one was very honourable and brave, if that is the case. Now, where was J.P. Morgan at this time? Well, conveniently, he skipped the maiden and only voyage of the Titanic at the last minute. Now, some sources claimed it was due to ill health, and some claimed that he remained to purchase more tapestries for his collection, but he did have valuable artwork removed from the ship before departure. I think there were rumblings that France was changing its law on exporting certain artworks or something. Can't remember all the details, but I'm sure there was something around about that time, so that could have played a part too. But conveniently, with the opposition removed, the following year, the Federal Reserve Bank was created, and the USA was turned into an incorporated business with its own business ID number, which was something I didn't know. Yep, the US is a business. Now, Bruce Ismay was dubbed the coward of the Titanic because he jumped in one of the lifeboats, taking away a space from a genuine passenger, and it was rumoured to be the last lifeboat. So a bit like Billy Zane's character in the film. Maybe that's what inspired it. It's said that Ismay never actually emotionally recovered, and apparently beforehand he had always been of a nervous disposition and depressed, and he was just a lot worse afterwards. Which, whether you intended to sink it or not, I would imagine you don't feel particularly good. Sadly, there seems to be no hard evidence to support this theory, although historians still go back and forth as to why he cancelled his trip. One author, George Baer, said that although he did cancel his trip, it was not merely hours before. And another author, J. Kent Layton, who penned Conspiracies at Sea, Titanic and Lusitania, said it was almost unimaginable that Morgan got all three of his major rivals on board. There would have been easier ways to dispose of them, although this would probably be the least suspect, compared to just flat-out murder or disappearing. But Layton points out that no one came forward to say that they helped sink the Titanic to kill these men. Doesn't mean that they aren't there. Who knows, maybe something went wrong and they all ended up perishing with the Titanic as well. I do like this theory, although we have no real supporting evidence other than circumstantial. I think it's plausible, but at the very least, it's a great movie plot. And then we move on to the coal fire theory. An Ohio State University engineer gave his opinion that a pile of stored coal could have been smouldering and as such added to the furnace to reduce the fire danger. This would have led to unsafe speeds, which ties in with another theory about the captain trying to set a new speed record. However, had this have happened, would it actually have been that bad? Now, I don't know if you're aware, but one of the coal bunkers actually caught fire before the voyage and remained burning for the first few days. Went out in time just to sink, it seems. This was due to the spontaneous combustion of coal. So when coal comes into contact with oxygen, the oxidation process starts and heat is produced. Just a little science lesson for you there. Historians and experts have debunked this theory because although there was a fire in Stockhold 9, it was not a danger and it was encased in steel and as such would not have spread anywhere. And this apparently was quite a common occurrence for ships at the time. It's just not widely talked about as the other ships didn't become famous. So this brings us to the final theory of today's episode. And this one is probably my favourite. And it's the fact that the Titanic didn't actually sink because it never set sail. I can hear the collective, huh? Robin Gardner actually wrote a book called The Ship That Never Sank about this theory. So the main premise of this theory is that it's an insurance scam. Yep, some things never change. People always try to scam that insurance. So if you remember, the people that built the Titanic also built two other ships, one of those being the Olympic. And the Olympic had actually crashed into the warship, the HMS Hawke, just off the coast of the Isle of Wight. Now, the Olympic had actually crashed into warship HMS Hawke, just off the coast of the Isle of Wight, and after the inquiry, it was deemed that the Olympic was at fault, and as it was deemed at fault, there was no insurance payout. Obviously, that was probably a considerable loss to the owners, and so therefore to try and recoup those losses, the Olympic was masqueraded as the Titanic. So some of the differences that are stated in the ships to help build this theory are that when the Titanic was built, it had 14 evenly spaced portholes, but when it left Southampton, there were 16 unevenly spaced portholes. And there are pictures of this online that are very easy to find if you want to have a look. The Olympic's floor was tiled, so it's said that they simply carpeted over it to hide the footprints, drink spills, stains, etc. from all the previous trips, because obviously it was meant to be a maiden voyage. And also, again apparently, the B cabins were removed from the Titanic and actually replaced with the Olympic's promenade. Very fancy. The intention supposedly was never to kill anyone, but just for the ship to sink, slowly, and that there would be other ships nearby to rescue the crew and the passengers. One of those ships was said to be the SS Californian, which did cause a bit of confusion because how they managed to find coal when the country was in the middle of a coal strike was quite impressive. It left London with no passengers, so had no ticket sales to fund the coal, and this was despite the demand of hundreds waiting to cross the Atlantic. And instead of passengers, it had stockpiles of blankets and warm clothes. For those that they got off the Titanic, I wonder? Its captain, Captain Lord, wasted no time in getting out of the port and into the North Atlantic. Somewhere to be, sir. But he forgot his wireless chart that he needed. Whoops! The SS Californian was one of only 6 ships within a 140-mile radius of the sinking Titanic. And in his book, Gardner claims that the liner accidentally ran over a darkened rescue ship, which was later mistaken as the iceberg. But J. Kent Layton points out in his book that the Titanic construction number was 401, whilst the Olympics was 400. And when the Olympic was scrapped and sold, there were no reports of pieces bearing anything other than 400. Or was there? The Olympic was dismantled in 1935, and some of the wood panelling and other parts, including the aft first-class staircase, were used in the White Swan Hotel in Alnwick, England, and they bear the number 401. Yet the propeller on the ocean floor also bears the number 401. So did they mix and match the ships? All that bit's better on the Olympic, we'll pinch that for the Titanic? Who knows? Part of this theory is also that the advertising that was used for the Titanic was actually the Olympic. But in my opinion, that's easily explained. You've got one ship that's already finished, one that's potentially still under construction, but you want to advertise and get those ticket sales in, so you use the sister ship. Former employees of Harland and Wolff, the shipbuilders, have apparently confirmed the switch. And they were told, with that wonderful age-old threat, that if they did tell anyone, it would be the last thing they ever did. A man named James A. Fenton, also known as Paddy the Pig, was one of these men who is said to confirm the switch. He told his story to an Australian traveller, who then wrote to the Northern Star newspaper in July 1996 to relay these conversations. And he told the paper that when the surviving crew got to port, they were taken aside by 2 men. One was very high up in the company, and the other very high up in the government. They were read the Official Secrets Act regarding the sinking, and were told it would be a minimum of 20 years and no job on release. Well, what do you think? Which one was your favourite, or is there one that I haven't discussed today that you know of? Let me know. And please remember to like, comment and subscribe. If you don't know what to comment, just put a star. They're fabulous. It just helps me with the algorithm. As always, you can find me on the socials at Seriously Now Pod. And for your content requests, feedback and Seriously You stories, it's seriouslynowpod@gmail.com. So until next time, lovelies, stay safe, stay free and stay weird. Bye-bye.